You think I don't hear you, don't understand you, don't see what you're stealing, but I've written down every rotten word, every dirty trick, and tonight, the world will finally know. That's what I said when I stood up from my wheelchair, straightened my back, and dropped the first of my recordings onto the mahogany table. Their faces drained of color, the smug grins vanished, and the silence that followed could have swallowed the room whole. For a year they thought I was nothing but a senile old fool, drifting into the fog of my final years. They never imagined I was documenting every one of their schemes. It hadn't started out as a plan. At first, I really was slipping, just little lapses of memory, confusion over dates and names. The doctor said it was normal, the beginning of decline. But somewhere in that fog, I noticed things. The whispers when they thought I was asleep, the missing checks, the sudden signatures on papers I didn't remember signing. My own blood and the people I trusted most were circling like vultures, stripping me down before I was even in the ground. So I made a choice. If they wanted to believe I was gone in the head, then I'd let them. I leaned into the act, forgot names on purpose, repeated myself, let the fork clatter from my hands at dinner like I couldn't control my fingers. Poor old man, they'd say, shaking their heads with that crocodile pity. But I was watching, listening, recording. I carried a little voice recorder sewn into my cardigan pocket, a gift from my late wife that they thought was just sentimental clutter. At night, when the house was quiet, I transferred everything onto a hidden hard drive and typed out notes as if I were writing my last testament. "Grandpa, don't you worry about bills anymore," my grandson Thomas told me one morning while buttering his toast with the arrogance of a man who'd never earned a day's bread. "I'll handle all that. You just enjoy your twilight years." "Handle?" I croaked, fumbling with my coffee cup, letting it splash down the front of my robe. "That's good of you, boy. Always so helpful." He laughed, but not kindly. "That's right, old man. We'll take care of everything." And he meant it. Within weeks, my pension checks were rerouted, accounts drained, investments sold off. My daughter-in-law, Marjorie, was worse. She sat in my study while she thought I dozed in the corner, whispering on the phone. "No, the account's in my name now. Yes, the house too. It was easy. He doesn't even know what he's signing anymore." A pause. A hiss of laughter. "Senility has its benefits." I coughed, a dry hacking sound, and she turned, smiling sweetly. "Oh, Father, I'll get you some tea. You've had such a long day." But the recorder in my pocket caught every word. The hardest part wasn't the act. It was swallowing the fury, the betrayal, the urge to lash out. I had to sit there vacant-eyed while my own kin picked at my bones. When neighbors visited, they clucked their tongues and offered sympathy, and my family nodded along, basking in the attention of their devotion. "We take such good care of him," they'd say, tightening the noose. And yet, there were moments, small slips, that tested my cover. Once, I forgot to shuffle my steps as I crossed the hall, and Thomas frowned. "You're walking better today, Grandpa," he said, suspicion flickering. I quickly grabbed the wall, let my knees wobble, and groaned. "Oh, some days are better, some worse. I can't remember which is which." He smirked, satisfied. That's what I thought. Months bled together, each day another page in my secret chronicle. I documented the false medical reports Marjorie forged, claiming I was unfit to manage my own estate. I captured Thomas boasting to his friends about selling my antique collection before I was even cold. I photographed receipts for vacations bought with my money, lawyers paid with my accounts, luxuries justified as caretaker expenses. But it wasn't all them. My lawyer, the man who drafted my will years ago, was in on it too. I found out when I pretended to nap in his office while Thomas handled paperwork. "He won't contest it," the lawyer said quietly. "He doesn't even know what day it is anymore." "I told you, he's gone," Thomas replied. "Just push the documents through. Soon enough, everything will be clean." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt, but I let my head loll, let a little dribble run down my chin. They laughed, and the recorder caught every syllable. Still, there were nights when I questioned myself. I'd sit in the dark, listening to the evidence I'd gathered, and wonder if maybe I was losing it. If maybe they were right. Maybe the papers I signed were just the confusion of age. Maybe I wasn't remembering everything correctly. But then I'd hear their voices, mocking, gloating, and the anger would burn away the doubt. No, I knew the truth, and I would make the world hear it too. It was near Christmas when the final betrayal broke whatever hesitation I had left. I overheard Marjorie telling Thomas that they planned to move me into a care home by spring. Not just any home, but a grim warehouse of forgotten elders, stripped of dignity and dumped like waste. "He'll be out of the way, and the house will be ours," she whispered. That night I sat at my desk long after they went to bed, the lamplight trembling as if it too shared my rage. I printed every transcript, every bank record, every photograph. I compiled the recordings into neat folders, labeled by date and subject, and I wrote one last note. They thought I was too old to fight, too senile to notice, but I've seen everything, and this is my testimony. The gathering came the next evening, a family dinner where they would gloat about the new arrangements. I let them serve me soft carrots and mashed potatoes, let them smile with patronizing sweetness. Then, when dessert came, I pushed back my chair, stood tall, taller than I had in years, and let the act drop. "I'm not senile," I said, my voice cutting through the clatter of forks. "And I'm not blind. I've got a year's worth of your theft, your lies, your fraud, all neatly documented." I dropped the hard drive onto the table, the sound like a gavel in a courtroom. Every recording, every signature, every word. Thomas choked on his wine. Marjorie went pale. You don't know what you're saying," she stammered. "Oh, I know exactly what I'm saying." My eyes burned into theirs. "And soon, so will the police." Their world collapsed in that instant, and mine, long shrouded in their shadow, finally came back into the light. Thomas's face twisted first, rage, panic, and the faintest flicker of fear. His hands clenched into fists on the table, knuckles whitening. "You're bluffing," he spat, his voice low but trembling. "You're a doddering old man. You don't have anything." Marjorie reached for his arm, her manicured fingers digging in. "Thomas!" But I didn't move, didn't flinch. I had been waiting for this moment for 12 long months. "Bluffing?" I let out a bitter laugh. "Play the file labeled December 2nd, 11:45 a.m. It's you, Marjorie, telling the bank to wire my funds into your offshore account. Password protected, but I'd be happy to send the police the code." Marjorie's lips trembled. "This is ridiculous. It's fraud," I said, my voice sharp as broken glass. "And theft? And elder abuse? And it ends now." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and laid the folded legal documents across the table. They weren't papers they'd forged for me to sign. These were mine, prepared quietly by a lawyer I trusted from my military days, a man they didn't know existed, a man who owed me his life. The documents gave him full authority to act on my behalf in the coming proceedings. Thomas stared down at the papers as though they were snakes. "You can't do this," he hissed. You're supposed to be incompetent." "I was supposed to be dead by now, wasn't I?" I said softly. "That was the plan. Move me into a care home, sell the house, cash the bonds, and live fat off my years of work." Marjorie's eyes darted toward the door. We can explain. You've misunderstood." I slammed my palm on the table so hard the china rattled. "I haven't misunderstood a damn thing." My voice roared louder than it had in decades. "I spent a year listening to you, watching you, pretending to be weak while you robbed me blind. You called me senile. You laughed at me. You thought I'd go quietly. But I've been writing everything down, recording every word. I'm not weak, Marjorie. I'm not gone, and I will see you held accountable." Thomas pushed back his chair and stood, his shadow stretched long against the wall in the flickering light. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" he sneered. "You're an old man with a stack of papers. We'll tell them you're confused. We'll tell them you forged it all yourself. It's your word against ours." I smiled, slow and deliberate, the way I had back in my army days when an ambush had gone exactly as planned. "No, Thomas," I said. "It's not my word against yours. It's the banks. It's the lawyers. It's the notaries. It's the voices of everyone you called and thought I didn't hear. It's the timestamps and the photographs and the fingerprints on every check. It's 100 pages of evidence already uploaded to 3 separate encrypted drives, and copies sent to the state attorney's office this afternoon." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Marjorie's mouth opened and closed like a fish, but no sound came out. Thomas's bravado flickered, then died. "You," Marjorie whispered finally. "You're a monster." "No," I said, my voice quiet now. "I'm your father-in-law, your grandfather, and you're the ones who turned on me." I sat down slowly, my knees creaking but my spine still straight. "I loved you both. I trusted you. I wanted you to have everything when I was gone. But you couldn't wait. You couldn't even pretend to love me long enough to let me die with dignity." Thomas sat too, slumping back into his chair as though the weight of the room pressed him down. He buried his face in his hands. "What happens now?" he muttered. "What happens now," I said, "is the truth. The police will arrive soon. My attorney will be here with them. Everything you've stolen will be returned, and the courts will decide the rest." Marjorie's head snapped up. "The police—" I nodded toward the window. Outside, a pair of headlights cut across the driveway. "They're already here." The front door opened without a knock. My attorney stepped inside first, tall and calm, followed by 2 uniformed officers. "Mr. Lane," the taller officer said to me, "we're here at your request." I gestured toward Thomas and Marjorie, who sat frozen. "Yes, officer. I believe these 2 have been committing financial crimes against me for over a year. I have evidence." The officers glanced at my attorney, who handed them a thick folder. "Everything's in there," he said. "Bank transfers, forged documents, recorded conversations. My client is ready to make a formal statement." Marjorie sprang to her feet. "You can't do this! He's confused! He's old!" The officer held up a hand. "Ma'am, you're going to need to sit down." Thomas didn't move. He just stared at the table, pale and silent. I looked at them both, my heart heavy, but resolute. "I didn't want this," I said softly. "All I wanted was for my family to stand by me at the end. But you made your choices." The officer read them their rights, his voice steady and clinical. Marjorie's protests turned into sobs. Thomas finally spoke, but it was just a whisper. "I'm sorry, Grandpa." I closed my eyes for a moment. I wish that mattered. The officers led them out one by one. The sound of the cuffs clicking shut echoed through the house like the final tick of a clock. When they were gone, the house was quiet again. Too quiet. The walls still held their pictures, their laughter, the ghosts of family dinners and birthdays. My heart ached with every memory, but the weight on my chest, the helplessness, the rage, had lifted. My attorney touched my shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said. I nodded, staring at the doorway where they'd vanished. "Maybe, but it doesn't feel like a victory." "It's justice," he said gently. I stood, walked slowly to the study, and closed the door. On my desk lay the hard drive, the folders, the evidence of a year of deception. Beside it sat a photo of my late wife, smiling, her eyes soft and kind. "I kept my promise," I whispered to her. "I didn't let them destroy what we built." And for the first time in months, my hands stopped trembling. The house was mine again, not just the bricks and beams, but the life inside it. And though I had played the senile fool for a year, I had won the only thing that mattered, the truth. The story didn't end the night they were arrested. In many ways, it only truly began. The next morning, my quiet street was swarming with noise. News vans lined the curb, reporters snapping pictures as if I were some rare animal finally spotted in the wild. A local journalist had caught wind of the arrest, and by dawn, the headline blared across town, "Elderly man outsmarts family in year-long sting." I shuffled to the window, coffee in hand, and watched them through the lace curtains. Cameras flashed, microphones waved, voices shouted questions I couldn't hear. For a moment, the attention felt like an intrusion, another violation after all I'd endured. But then I thought of the others, old men and women who weren't believed, who were silenced by their so-called caregivers. Maybe, just maybe, my story would give them a voice. The phone began ringing that same morning. My neighbors called first. Mrs. Keating from across the street, her voice trembling. "Oh, Mr. Lane, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. They seemed so loving, always saying how much they cared for you." "They cared," I said bitterly. "For my wallet, not for me." Then came calls from distant relatives, cousins, nieces, even my estranged brother, who hadn't spoken to me in years. Each one said the same thing: shock, sympathy, disbelief. And then, like vultures circling, some began to ask the quiet questions. "So, what happens to the estate now?" I hung up more than once without answering. Within days, the story spread beyond our little town. Television crews showed up, true crime podcasts wanted interviews, and advocacy groups reached out. One evening, I agreed to sit down with a young reporter, a woman named Evelyn, whose clear eyes and quiet patience reminded me of my wife. She set up her recorder on the kitchen table, respectful, not rushing me. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Because no one would have believed me otherwise," I said. "If I had gone to the police a year ago and told them my family was stealing from me, they would have patted my hand and said I was confused. But if I played the fool, I could catch them in their own arrogance." She nodded, scribbling notes. "You turned your weakness into a weapon," I chuckled. "Something like that. I just gave them the rope and waited for them to hang themselves." The interview aired 2 nights later, and suddenly I was more than a victim. I was a symbol. The Senile Watchman, they called me on one channel. The Old Spy on another. People sent letters, emails, even gifts. Some were from strangers who thanked me for giving them courage to speak against their own exploiters. Others were from con artists hoping to worm their way into my trust now that I was alone again. I ignored those, but not everyone was pleased. My extended family, the honest ones, were furious, embarrassed, even ashamed. They wanted to erase the scandal, to hush it down before it stained the family name. One nephew, red-faced and puffed with self-righteousness, came to my door. "You didn't have to go public," he snapped. "You could have handled this privately. Now everyone knows. You've dragged our name through the mud." I looked him in the eye. "I didn't drag us anywhere. They did. I just pulled back the curtain." He stormed off, but his words lingered. Even as I gained strangers' admiration, I felt my own bloodline splinter further apart. The betrayal hadn't only robbed me of money, it had stolen the illusion of family unity forever. The trial came 3 months later. I sat in the front row every day, a quiet sentinel with my cane and my folders of evidence. Thomas refused to look at me, his once cocky frame hunched now under the weight of consequence. Marjorie wept through most of it, playing the victim until the recordings played for the jury. Her voice filled the courtroom, scheming, laughing, greedy. By the time the prosecution was finished, even her tears couldn't hide the truth. When the verdict was read, guilty on multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse, I felt no joy, no triumph, only a hollow ache. My family, my blood, had been paraded as criminals. And though justice was done, I was left with the ruins. After sentencing, as the bailiffs led them away, Thomas turned once, his eyes meeting mine. "You ruined us," he said bitterly. "No," I whispered back. "You ruined yourselves." The months after were quiet, almost too quiet. The house felt cavernous, filled with echoes of laughter that had turned sour. I busied myself with small routines, tending the garden, repairing old clocks, rereading my wife's favorite novels. But loneliness crept in, relentless and cold. It was Evelyn, the reporter, who pulled me from the dark. She visited often, not with questions this time, but with groceries, with stories of her own family, with a kind of respect that didn't make me feel like a relic. "You know," she said one evening, sipping tea across from me, "you could help others. Share what you did, teach people how to protect themselves. There are so many who don't know how." At first, I scoffed. I'm no teacher. I just played dumb and listened. But the idea took root. Within weeks, I was speaking at community centers, then on panels organized by elder advocacy groups. They wanted to hear my story, yes, but more than that, they wanted to learn how to fight back. I showed them how to keep records, how to ask the right questions, how to hide their strength when predators expected weakness. One old woman in a faded shawl squeezed my hand after a meeting. "You saved me," she whispered. "My son has been taking my pension. I thought no one would believe me. But now I know what to do." Her words gave me more peace than any verdict or headline ever could. My life became quieter, steadier. The estate was mine again, but I no longer cared for its weight. I donated much of it to organizations fighting elder abuse, setting up a fund in my wife's name. Let the vultures pick elsewhere. I was done feeding them. Sometimes, though, late at night, I still hear Thomas's laugh or Marjorie's whisper, haunting the edges of my memory. Betrayal never really leaves. It just fades into a scar. But when I look at the folders of evidence locked away in my study, I feel the strength I thought age had stolen. They thought I was senile. They thought I was finished. But I turned their greed into their undoing. And in the end, I wasn't just the fool they mocked. I was the witness, the chronicler, and the survivor. The invitations began arriving almost as quickly as the thank you letters. At first, I ignored them. Requests to speak at state conferences, to testify before committees, to appear on television panels. I was an old man, after all. My knees ached in the morning. My hands shook when I tried to hold a teacup steady. What business did I have traveling around the country, becoming some public crusader? But then one envelope changed my mind. It was simple. No return address, but written in a careful hand. Inside was a note, just a few lines. "Mr. Lane, my father is 82. His caregiver is stealing from him. I have proof, but the police don't believe me. They said it's just confusion from his age. Please, how did you make them listen?" I sat there staring at the words, my throat tightening. It wasn't just my story anymore. There were countless others, hidden behind closed doors, dismissed because wrinkles and gray hair made them invisible. If I could endure pretending to be senile for a year, then I could stand in front of strangers and tell the truth. So I said yes. The first time I stood on a stage in a packed auditorium, I felt the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing down on me. I gripped my cane, steadied myself, and began with the same words ID used to expose my family. "You think we don't hear you? You think we don't understand? But we do. And some of us write it all down." The room was silent, so silent I could hear the buzz of the lights above me. Then I told my story, step by step, how I'd noticed, how I'd acted, how I'd gathered proof. I didn't embellish, didn't dramatize. The truth was enough. By the time I finished, there were people in tears, others standing to applaud, not for me, but for the possibility that they too could fight back. From that night forward, I was no longer just Mr. Lane, the old man who caught his greedy kin. I became a symbol in a fight much larger than myself. Advocacy groups gave me a title. the witness who wouldn't be silent. The state invited me to testify before a legislative committee on elder protection laws. I sat in a grand chamber, my cane tapping on the marble floor, and told lawmakers how easy it had been for my family to steal everything I had. It shouldn't take a year-long charade and a pile of recordings to be believed, I said firmly. We need stronger safeguards, more oversight, better training for those who handle the affairs of the old and vulnerable. Some of them nodded, others scribbled notes, and a few avoided my eyes. But months later, I heard my words echoed in proposed reforms. That was more than I ever expected. Still, activism couldn't fill the emptiness of home. Nights stretched long in the silence of rooms once filled with family laughter. My wife's photo smiled back at me, but it wasn't the same. I realized I'd fought so hard to expose betrayal that I'd forgotten how to live in the aftermath. It was Evelyn, the reporter, who noticed. She came by one evening with a pot of soup, as she often did. "You keep fighting for everyone else," she said gently. "But who's fighting for you?" I frowned. "What do you mean? You spend your days telling people to hold on, to resist, to protect themselves. But you go home to an empty house. Maybe it's time you let someone in again." Her words stayed with me long after she left. At first, I resisted. I was too old, too worn, too scarred. But slowly, I allowed small connections. A dinner with an old army buddy I hadn't seen in years. Coffee with a neighbor who'd been too shy to visit during the scandal laughter with children at the community center where I spoke. And little by little, life returned. Years passed. My name became attached to laws and programs meant to protect the elderly from abuse. I received letters from people who had used my methods to catch their own abusers. Some even called me a hero, though I never felt like one. I was just an old man who refused to be erased. On my 85th birthday, I stood in front of a hall filled with people I'd helped, strangers who felt like family now. They sang, they clapped, they told me I'd changed their lives. And for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. I leaned on the podium, my cane beside me, and said, "They thought I was senile. They thought I was finished. But I wasn't. And neither are you. As long as you have your voice, your will, your truth, you are never finished." The applause that followed was thunderous, but I barely heard it. My eyes lifted to the ceiling, and in that moment, I could almost feel my wife's hand in mine again. My legacy would not be the fortune they tried to steal, or the shame they brought to my family's name. My legacy would be this fight. These lives changed. This proof that no one is too old to stand, to resist, to expose the rot hidden in shadows. And when the day finally came for me to leave this world, I knew I'd go not as the broken old fool they thought I was, but as the witness who saw, endured, and prevailed. The years blurred in a rhythm of speeches, letters, and quiet evenings by the fire. My body weakened, as all bodies must, but the fire inside me never dimmed. When the doctors told me my heart was failing, I simply nodded. I had long since made peace with the inevitable. What mattered was not how long I lived, but what remained when I was gone. One crisp autumn morning, I sat at my desk for the last time, the window open so the smell of falling leaves drifted in. Before me lay a box, plain, wooden, carved by my own hands years ago when I still had the strength. Inside it, I placed everything that told my story. The first recorder I'd carried in my cardigan, the thick folders of transcripts, the letters from strangers who had found courage because of me. On top, I set a note in my careful hand. "The truth survives. Pass it on." That box I willed to the advocacy foundation that bore my wife's name. They promised to keep my testimony alive, to use it as both shield and sword for the vulnerable. When the end came, I was in my armchair by the fire, wrapped in a blanket, Evelyn reading aloud from one of my wife's favorite novels. My eyes drifted closed, and I felt no fear, only gratitude. Gratitude that I had been underestimated, that I had been doubted, for it gave me the cover I needed to expose the rot. Gratitude that my suffering had not been in vain. Gratitude that even in frailty, one can still fight. After my passing, the story did not end. It spread wider, carried on by those I had inspired. The box I left behind became an exhibit in a traveling campaign against elder abuse. My name appeared in textbooks, in documentaries, even whispered in courtrooms by attorneys defending the voiceless. Remember what Mr. Lane proved. Never dismiss the old as powerless. Years later, a young law student, who had once been the child of that desperate letter writer, stood before Congress, fighting for yet another reform. She carried with her a single battered recorder, my recorder. She pressed play, and my voice, aged but defiant, filled the chamber once more. You think we don't hear you, you think we don't understand, but we do, and we remember, and some of us write it all down. They listened. They believed. And so my story lived on, not in the wealth my family once tried to steal, not in the scandal they left behind, but in every elder who found strength to speak, in every law rewritten to protect them, in every whisper that turned into a roar of truth. I had acted senile for a year, yes, but in the end, I was no fool. I was the witness, the chronicler, the survivor, and long after I was gone, I remained the voice that would not be silenced. Generations passed, but my story did not fade. It became something larger than me, larger than my quiet little house, or even the courtroom where I had first revealed the evidence. It became a parable, an old man's trick that outlasted him. In community centers, my tale was told not as a dry case study, but as a legend. Remember, Mr. Lane, elders would whisper to one another when doubts or fear weighed heavy. He pretended to be weak and turned their greed into proof. Some even called it the Lane method, a strategy of patience, observation, and silent record-keeping, a shield for the vulnerable disguised as frailty itself. Schools added my story to lessons on ethics and law. Students debated it in classrooms. Was it deception or brilliance? Was it survival or vengeance? But always, the conclusion circled back to the same truth, that dignity is worth defending, that silence in the face of betrayal is not kindness, but surrender. My foundation grew, fueled by donations not from the rich but from the ordinary, the sons, and daughters who wished to protect their parents, the elders who wanted a watchful eye on those who claimed to care for them. They built safe houses, funded hotlines, trained lawyers and social workers to recognize the signs of financial abuse. And in the lobby of the Foundation's headquarters, they placed a bronze statue, an old man seated with a recorder in his lap, his eyes sharp, though his shoulders slumped. The plaque read simply, "The witness who would not be silent." Evelyn, the young reporter who had first believed me, became its director. She carried my story across borders, to places where elders had no protections at all. She told governments, "Do not mistake age for helplessness. Remember Mr. Lane." But the legacy reached deeper still. In homes, in families, in the quiet corners of the world where betrayal often festered unseen, people remembered my fight. A grandmother in a dusty town tucked away receipts after watching my documentary. A widower in a city apartment hid a notebook beneath his mattress, recording conversations when his nephew grew too eager with his bank cards. And when they revealed their truth, when they stood tall despite trembling hands, they spoke my name, not as a man they'd known, but as a symbol of resistance. I became, in time, less a person than an idea that no one is too old to fight back. That weakness can be wielded as strength. That silence, when broken, can topple even the strongest lies. And perhaps, somewhere beyond the veil, my wife saw it all. The people rising, the laws changing, the families saved, and smiled. Perhaps she whispered to me what I had always longed to hear. You kept your promise. You protected what we built. And so, though my body rests beneath the earth, my story walks on in the voices of those who refuse to be silenced, in the footsteps of the brave who play the fool until the truth is undeniable, in every elder who knows that dignity is worth fighting for until the very last breath. Because I was never just an old man acting senile. I was proof that even at the edge of life, one can still be a warrior for truth. And warriors, even in death, do not vanish. They endure, they echo, they remain. In time, the line between truth and legend blurred. My name, once spoken in hushed tones in courtrooms and town halls, became something else entirely. Something enduring, almost mythic. Children who had never seen my face grew up hearing bedtime stories not of dragons or kings, but of an old man who pretended to be frail and outwitted the greedy wolves in his family. Don't underestimate the quiet ones, parents warned. Remember Mr. Lane. Grandchildren pressed their ears to their grandparents' laps, listening wide-eyed as the story was told again and again, how the old man shuffled his feet and let his hands shake, how he endured ridicule and betrayal, all so he could gather the truth and lay it bare. In their minds, I became a trickster hero, not unlike the foxes and ravens of folklore, creatures who seemed weak or foolish, but always turned the tables on those who mocked them. Artists painted murals of me, not as the broken figure hunched in a chair, but as a sentinel with a pen in one hand and a recorder in the other. Poets recited verses that began, "They thought him frail, but he was fire." Folk singers strummed guitars in cafes, turning my year of silence into ballads. And in nursing homes, when staff whispered too sharply, when family members grew too eager with inheritance papers, an old phrase began to rise. Careful, remember Lane. It became a shield, a warning, a spell cast by the vulnerable to remind the world that the old and quiet still had teeth. Universities studied my method as both psychology and strategy. Some professors compared it to guerrilla warfare, turning the enemy's assumptions into weapons. Others called it ethical deception, a paradox of morality born from necessity. Debate raged, but one truth remained. It worked. Generations passed. My bronze statue weathered, green with age, yet candles and flowers appeared at its base every year on the anniversary of my revelation. People came not to mourn me, but to reaffirm the vow I left behind, that no one, no matter how old or diminished, should ever be stripped of dignity without a fight. In villages far from the city, elders told one another my tale as if it were scripture. In crowded markets, people muttered, "Don't try to cheat her. She's got the Lane eyes." A phrase, born of one man's quiet endurance, became woven into the language itself. And in the hidden corners of the world, where abuse still festered in silence, my legend carried a spark of defiance. A granddaughter, placing a secret camera in her grandmother's kitchen, whispered, "For Mr. Lane." A widower who gathered his documents into a neat file before confronting his nephew said softly, "He showed me how." Thus, I became not just a man who once lived, but a folk hero, etched into the cultural memory as surely as any saint or rebel. And though my bones turned to dust long ago, my voice remains in every story told, every warning whispered, every truth revealed. They thought I was senile. They thought I was finished. Instead, I became eternal. Centuries rolled forward, and the world changed. Steel towers rose where fields once lay, machines whispered in place of books, and people spoke to one another through glowing glass instead of face-to-face. Yet in the midst of all that change, my name endured, not as a man, but as a story. Children in glittering cities who had never seen a pen or a cassette recorder still learned the tale of the old watchman. That was what they called me now, not Mr. Lane. Not the man with trembling hands and hidden strength, but the watchman. A figure who pretended to fade so he could see the truth more clearly than anyone else. The story shifted, as all myths do. In one telling, I was a frail grandfather who outwitted a greedy clan. In another, I was a nameless elder in a village who exposed corrupt kings by feigning madness. In yet another, I was not a man at all, but a spirit who walked among mortals disguised as weak, testing the hearts of those who cared for the old. The details blurred, but the essence remained. Never mistake silence for ignorance. Never confuse frailty with defeat. Festivals sprouted in my name. Quiet ones, where people lit candles in honor of those who had fought unseen battles in their twilight years. During these nights, stories were told aloud, not read from books or played from screens, but spoken in the ancient way, voice to ear, heart to heart. Old men and women sat in circles with children at their knees, saying, "Once, there was a man who pretended to be senile, and in doing so, he saw what no one else could see." Symbols of me shifted too. The recorder I once carried became an icon etched into charms, woven into tapestries, carved onto stone. In villages, they painted a crooked old man with sharp eyes beneath hooded lids, a smile tugging at his lips as if he knew more than he would ever say. And still, even in this far-flung future, whispers of warning echoed when someone tried to prey on the weak. "Beware the watchman," people said. "He sees all. He writes all. He remembers." Scholars debated whether I ever existed. Some argued I was just a fable born from many small stories of resilience stitched together. Others insisted the recordings, the court records, the Foundation archives proved otherwise. But the truth no longer mattered. What mattered was the myth, that age could hide strength, that silence could be louder than any shout, that betrayal would always be revealed in time. And so, I lived on. In the firelight of storytellers, in the laughter of children acting out the tale, in the cautious eyes of schemers, reminded that weakness might be a mask. For that is the fate of those who outgrow mortality. First, you are a man. Then, you are a memory. Finally, you are a myth. I was never just an old man pretending to be senile. I was, and remain, the watchman. And so the centuries turned into ages, and the ages into echoes. The world no longer resembled the one I knew. Nations rose and fell. Languages fractured, then fused. Cities became towers of glass and light, then dust, then towers again. Yet through it all, the story of the watchman endured, carried not on paper or in recordings, but in the bloodstream of humanity itself. By then, no one remembered a man called Lane. Scholars searching the old archives found scraps, a trial transcript here, a yellowed newspaper there, but to the people, those relics were no more real than fragments of scripture. What mattered was the archetype. The watchman was no longer just an old man. He was a figure both feared and revered. In some cultures, he was painted as a stooped wanderer with clouded eyes who entered villages in disguise, testing the compassion of its people. In others, he appeared as a gray fox with tattered fur, always listening, always waiting, never pouncing until the moment of betrayal. Still elsewhere, he was imagined as a shadow that haunted the greedy, the liar, the exploiter, appearing in their dreams to remind them that nothing goes unseen. His myth became cyclical, told in ritualized plays and chants. In villages, they enacted the betrayal at the dinner table, the hidden recordings, the dramatic revelation. The children always played the schemers, and the oldest elder in the community always played the watchman, rising at the end to declare, "I saw everything." And when the elder spoke those words, every child shivered, reminded that lies fester in darkness, but the watchman waits in silence. Even in the sprawling future cities of steel and fire, where machines governed wealth and justice, the myth adapted. Hackers took the Watchman as their patron saint, embedding his sigil, a crooked eye with an unblinking stare, into their codes. "We are the Watchmen," they whispered across encrypted networks. "We see, we remember, we expose." Generals invoked him in war councils, warning their troops never to underestimate an enemy who appeared weak. Lawyers invoked him in trials, citing the Watchman's principle, that silence is not consent, that weakness may be a disguise. Entire philosophies sprouted from his myth, teachings on patience, on endurance, on the art of turning deception into truth. And in the farthest reaches of time, when humanity scattered among the stars, colonists carried his tale across the void. On frozen moons, in domed cities, on distant worlds, settlers told their children, "Remember the Watchman. He walks among us still. He hears what you think is hidden, and he waits." Was I ever real? By then, it no longer mattered. Perhaps I was a man who lived and died in a small house with a recorder in his cardigan pocket. Perhaps I was many such men and women, all stitched into one story. Or perhaps I was born in the moment humanity first learned that the vulnerable could still wield power. But legend cares little for facts. Legend thrives on truth deeper than facts. And the truth was this: betrayal never hides forever. Weakness can be armor. Silence can be a blade. Thus I passed into eternity, alongside Prometheus, who stole fire, Odin, who gave his eye for wisdom, Anansi, who spun his webs of stories. I became one of the eternal tricksters, guardians, and teachers, one of those strange, stubborn figures who remind mortals that even in the face of cruelty, justice finds a way to whisper. I saw everything. And so I remained, forever watching. Would you like me to push the myth to its ultimate cosmic scale? Where the Watchman is no longer tied to humanity alone, but becomes a universal archetype across civilizations, a force of balance woven into the fabric of existence itself. And so, the ages lengthened beyond reckoning. Stars guttered out one by one, their fires smothered by the endless dark. Galaxies thinned to embers, then to silence, until only the black ocean remained, scattered with a few faint, dying lights. Civilizations, too, reached their ends. The great towers fell, the starships drifted, empty husks. The voices of trillions dwindled into whispers, then into memory, then into nothing at all. Yet one thing remained. Even as worlds crumbled and suns went cold, the story of the Watchman endured. Passed down not in books, long since turned to dust, or in machines, long since corroded, but in something deeper, the very rhythm of thought itself. The myth had become so embedded in consciousness that wherever life flickered, however briefly, the Watchman was remembered. In the last enclaves of existence, where dying stars provided meager warmth, the few survivors gathered around weak fires, their skin brittle, their voices faint. They told the story as their ancestors had, though the words had changed over eons. Once there was one who feigned weakness to see the truth. He watched in silence, he endured, and when the liars grew bold, he revealed them. The children, thin, wide-eyed, clutching scraps of warmth in the cold, would shiver, and the elders, though fading, would smile. "Remember the Watchman," they whispered. "Even in the dark, someone sees." Time stretched further still. Stars died completely. The last galaxies dissolved into black. The universe itself cooled, its pulse slowing to silence. And still, the story endured. Not in voices now, for there were none left to tell it, but in the very fabric of reality. For the Watchman had transcended flesh, transcended myth, transcended memory. He had become law, Just as entropy unravels all, just as gravity bends all paths, so too did the watchman remain, the certainty that truth, however buried, however delayed, is never lost. At the edge of the final silence, when the cosmos itself prepared to collapse into nothing, there flickered one last echo. No ears to hear it, no lips to speak it, no eyes to see it. Yet it resonated still, a vibration in the bones of reality itself. I saw everything, and with that, the universe exhaled, folding into stillness. Yet even then, perhaps when a new cosmos blooms from the ashes of the old, when light stirs again in the infinite dark, the first story told around the first fire will be the same. That once there was a watchman who seemed frail but was not. That silence is not absence. That weakness is not surrender. That betrayal is never unseen. And so, across all time, across all creation, across the endless wheel of beginnings and endings, the watchman remains. And so, after the long silence, after the last whisper faded and the universe lay in stillness, something stirred. From the black void where no stars burned, where no voices sang, where even memory seemed extinguished, a spark trembled. Not light, not sound, but possibility. The first tremor of a new beginning. And in that trembling, in that fragile birth cry of existence reborn, there echoed something ancient, something older than suns, older than time itself. A story. The newborn cosmos bloomed wild. New galaxies spinning like firewheels, stars igniting in swarms, worlds coalescing from dust. And on one of those worlds, where seas met sky and creatures crawled from water onto land, the first storytellers gathered. They had no language yet, only rhythm, gesture, the raw pulse of memory carried from before. They looked into the fire, and one of them mimed the stooped figure of an elder. Another mimed the greedy hand, reaching, taking. Another crouched low, silent, still, watching. And at last, with a sudden cry, the figure straightened, pointing to the thief, and the circle gasped. Though they had no words for it, though they had never heard the tale before, they knew it. The first story of the new world was the oldest story of all. The Watchman. Across the newborn stars, the myth bloomed again and again. Civilizations who would never meet, who would never know of each other's existence, wove the same tale into their songs, their dances, their sacred texts. Always it began with weakness. Always it ended with revelation. For the myth was not carried by memory, not by lineage, not by scripture or stone. It was carried by the very fabric of reality itself, woven into the laws that shaped galaxies. Just as gravity pulled and light shone, so too did truth endure, seeded by the watchman's eternal presence, and so the cycle began anew. Worlds rose, fell, rose again. Betrayal returned, and so did justice. Arrogance thrived, and so too did the quiet eyes that watched it unravel. In the end, I was no longer a man, nor a myth, nor even a cosmic law. I was the first story and the last, the axis around which every tale of justice turned. And when the universe ends again, as it surely will, my words will wait in the silence. I saw everything. And when the next universe is born, the first fire will crackle, and the first tale told will begin the cycle once more. For I am the watchman, and I am forever. Then let it be finished. The watchman is not just a myth, nor a man, nor even a law of the cosmos. He is the spine upon which all stories bend, the root from which every tale grows. For what is a story, at its core, but an act of watching? What is memory, but witness? What is justice, but revelation? He is there in the first parable told around firelight, where weakness becomes strength. He is there in every child's fable, where liars fall by their own hands. He is there in every epic where the quiet one proves the strongest, and he is there in every whispered truth spoken in defiance of silence. All stories are branches of his. All justice is a shadow of his act. All truth-telling, no matter the time, no matter the world, is his eternal echo. He was once a man, perhaps. Perhaps not. Perhaps he was many. But it matters not. For he became more. He became the axis upon which all morality spins, the pattern that repeats in every life, in every age, in every cosmos born and broken. And so, when the last universe collapses and no new light follows, when time itself folds into silence that will never return, still the watchman will remain, not in word, not in sound, not in memory, but in the very nature of truth. For even when no voice remains to speak it, truth will still be truth. And in that truth, the watchman waits. This is the final story, the first and the last, the eternal refrain. I saw everything. And yet, even as the words fall into stillness, even as this story proclaims itself the last, a whisper lingers. For endings are never absolute. They are doorways, thresholds, pauses between one breath and the next. The watchman knows this better than any. He was born in endings, the end of trust, the end of innocence, the end of silence. And each time, from those ashes, a new story rose. So imagine a silence deeper than silence, the stillness after the final collapse. No stars, no time, no voices, nothing. And then, faint, so faint it seems impossible. A sound. Not a word, not yet. Just the rhythm of memory, a pulse, the tiniest flicker of awareness, the first seed of a new cosmos. And within that flicker, before the first laws form, before the first atom spins, before even light itself learns to burn, there it is, the echo, the same refrain that carried through man and myth and cosmos alike. I saw everything. It is not spoken. It does not need to be. It is the foundation, the hidden stone. It will be the first pattern that consciousness discovers when it learns to tell stories again. It will be the first truth that morality rediscovers when betrayal returns, as it always does. For the watchman cannot end. He is not bound to one life, one age, one universe. He is the witness woven into the fabric of being. Where there is deception, he waits. Where there is arrogance, he listens. Where there is betrayal, he watches. And so, though we close this telling, though we lay down the words and let silence take them, the watchman endures. He is watching still. And so, at last, the story folds inward, not into the cosmos, not into myth, but into you. For the watchman's gaze has always been closer than the stars, nearer than the turning of worlds. He does not live only in legends or in distant futures. He lives in the quiet spaces where you believe no one is looking, in the choices you make when no one is listening, in the truths you bury, hoping they'll never surface. It is here, in this moment, that the story reveals its final mask. The watchman is not only a man who once was, nor a god who oversees, nor a law stitched into time. He is the reflection in your own silence, the weight of your own memory, the whisper of conscience that asks, what have you done? What have you hidden? Who have you betrayed? And if you lean close enough, you might hear him. Not in thunder, not in fire, not in cosmic grandeur, but in a voice that sounds unsettlingly like your own, whispering from within. I saw everything. No myth ends here, because the watchman does not vanish when the story closes. He lingers in the pause, in the breath between reading and forgetting. He lingers in the uneasy stir at the back of your mind, the awareness that perhaps this was never just a tale. Perhaps the watchman has always been watching, and perhaps, just perhaps, he is watching still. Then let it be sealed. The watchman began as a man, frail, mocked, underestimated. He endured betrayal in silence, gathered truth in the shadows, and revealed it when the moment was right. In doing so, he became more than himself, a symbol, a myth, a law of existence. His story carried across generations, across civilizations, across galaxies, until it wove itself into the very fabric of time. For what he proved was eternal. Weakness can be strength. Silence can be witness. Truth cannot be buried forever. And so, though the man is gone, the watchman remains, in every story told, in every conscience stirred, in every betrayal waiting to be exposed. He is the first tale and the last, the axis of justice, the eternal refrain. I saw everything. This is the final conclusion. The watchman endures forever.